Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the ASUS VG28UQL1A. As always, let's cover the specs first, and then I'll talk about the good, the bad, and a new thing I'm adding to my reviews, the gray area, which are things that may or may not be important to you. I decided to do this because I noticed with a lot of my videos, certain things I was putting down as a negative were based on my personal preference and not applicable to everyone's personal preferences or intended use. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The ASUS VG28UQL1A is a 28-inch 4K IPS panel with a 144Hz refresh rate and a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. This has a typical brightness of 300 nits and a peak brightness of 450 nits, allowing this to have HDR 400, which is certified by VESA and has 10-bit color. This covers 90% of the DCI-P3 color space with a typical contrast ratio of 1000 to 1, a max contrast ratio with HDR of 1,000,000 to 1, and with the ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio, this goes up to 100,000,000 to 1. This has a pixel pitch of 0.16 millimeters, which is roughly 157 pixels per inch. This has AMD FreeSync Premium and is G-Sync compatible certified. For ports, you will find 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, and 1 DP 1.4 port. This also has 2 USB 3.1 expansion ports and a headphone jack. This also has 2 2-watt speakers, which I'll do a sound test for in a little bit. For the stand adjustments, this has height from 0 to 120 millimeters, swivel 15 degrees to the left or right. It can pivot 90 degrees either direction and can tilt 5 degrees forward and 20 degrees back. The monitor weighs 15.2 pounds with the stand and 10.3 pounds without the stand. This is VESA monitor arm compatible with a 100mm by 100mm pattern, and in the box you will find the power adapter, power cable, DP cable, HDMI cable, USB 3.0 cable, quick start guide, and a warranty card. And last is the price, which is $799 on Amazon or Newegg. Before I move on to the menu and panel settings, let's showcase the speakers real quick at a roughly 3-foot sitting distance from the monitor and at 100, 75, 50, and 25% volume. I'll also make sure that these levels are even in post with the rest of the video, but also that they will match when I replay this on this monitor what it actually sounds like when I played it originally. Now that I've covered these speakers, let's look at the panel settings, which I won't showcase everything here, but rather some highlights of the main features. I actually almost cut this portion out because it was becoming so long, as this monitor actually has a lot of options with it, but hopefully this helps you see what some of these options look like in person instead of just what they look like off of the ASUS website. So the first tab here is the gaming tab, and this is where you will find overclocking, variable overdrive, adaptive sync, extreme low motion blur, game plus, game visual, which is the presets we'll get to here in a second, and then shadow boost. Overclocking allows you to adjust the refresh rate, and variable overdrive allows you to adjust the response time, which has levels from 0 to 5. 0 being off, of course, and I've personally had mine at 2. Anything above that actually starts to seem like there's more ghosting, and 5 is pretty bad. Now I have adaptive sync turned on so I can enable G-Sync compatibility, which is after that, and I don't actually mess with the extreme low motion blur as it makes the monitor dim as a trade-off. I've tested it, but it's not a function I personally use because of that. Now this does have something unique compared to other monitors that I've reviewed though, where you can actually change the clarity position and then you can change the clarity level. And this has levels 1 through 5, 5 being the darkest, 1 being the lightest here. So you can tweak that a little bit. Don't mind the bars that are on the screen when I'm displaying this though. This has to do with my camera and actually what it can actually pick up as it adjusts to the extreme low motion blur. So these aren't bars that you would actually see in person. This is just because the monitor is refreshing the screen so fast, and the hertz with my camera, what it can actually pick up, can't match that even with manual adjustments to it. The Game Plus tab is where you can activate crosshair, timer, FPS counter, display alignment, or sniper. Next we have game visual, which is where you will find the presets. So I'll showcase each of those now. Just keep in mind my camera auto adjusts its exposure, so it will make some of these seem brighter than they are. Here though we have scenery, racing, cinema, RTS/RPG, FPS, sRGB, and MOBA. After that, there's Shadow Boost, which clarifies dark areas of the game without overexposing bright areas, improving overall viewing while also making it easier to spot enemies hidden in the dark areas of the map. This has off, level 1, level 2, level 3, and dynamic adjustment. Next is the image tab, and here I want to highlight HDR first, which has 3 separate modes: gaming mode, cinema mode, and console mode. Now I've tested each of these in Doom Eternal and on the Xbox Series X, but honestly I can't actually tell any difference, and ASUS doesn't have any information on their website for this, so my assumption was it was supposed to tweak black and white levels, but like I said, I couldn't actually find anything here on their websites to tell me, and I couldn't tell a difference in person. After that you have Vivid Pixel, which helps enhance image outlines and reduce noise bars for crystal clear and detail-oriented viewing. Last, I want to cover the ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio, which dynamically enhances the display's contrast by adjusting the luminance of the backlight to achieve the darkest black and brightest white, delivering lifelike images. Of course, these are things that ASUS is saying off their website. I'm trying to make sure that they pop up on screen here. My camera actually won't showcase this feature very well, but having played with it on and off, it's noticeable, but not as much as I was hoping it would be based off of their write-ups on it. The next tab is the color tab, and here I just want to cover the color temp and skin tone. For color temp, you have cool, normal, warm, and user mode. In user mode, you can adjust the red, green, or blue from 100% to 0, and it is set to 100% by default. For skin tone, you have reddish, natural, and yellowish. After this, we have the input tab, and here I just want to point out you can confirm that you are using the HDMI 2.1 ports, also on top of the labeling that this actually has on the back of the panel. Last is the settings tab, and the only things I want to mention here is this is where you can find the eco setting if you need to use it, and the volume setting is here and is set to 50% by default. So now that I've covered these specs, let's talk about what I like about this monitor, and the big draw here for me, and I think for most people, is going to be the 4K at 144 Hz, which these monitors are now finally a little more common than a year ago, and especially 2 years ago, which is really great to see. Now I've gamed on other 4K 144Hz panels like my ASUS VG28UQL1A monitor, which is much larger at 43 inches, and seriously the size comparison here is ridiculous, but the thing this monitor has that blows the ASUS out of the water is the fast 1 millisecond gray to gray response time compared to the ASUS 1 millisecond motion picture response time. Gray to gray is fast, and it is very noticeable here in the UFO test. Now this is going to be what my eye can detect right now, and I still don't have the Pursuit camera set up, so I can't really get a really good recording of this, but visually I don't see any ghosting at all, which is incredible. The bigger question here though is, does this translate to games? And it does. The response time here not only feels faster than the VA panels I'm used to playing on, but add to that the IPS panel with the great colors, the 4K resolution, and the high refresh rate, and it creates an amazing playing experience. Fast-paced games like first-person shooters definitely play better than the VA panels I'm used to playing on. Playing Doom Eternal, which is a game I usually showcase with all of my monitor reviews because my GPU can actually hit the 144Hz in 2 or 4K, and this was actually the smoothest and most visually satisfying experience I've had with the game to date. Other games like Destiny 2 or Halo Infinite ran smooth as well, but that did come at a slight cost with the contrast and black levels, which I will talk about more in a little bit, but overall these play great in terms of the response time here with very little ghosting or black smearing. For a casual or enthusiast gamer, this will be very hard to notice if you can notice it at all. For hardcore and competitive gamers, if your GPU isn't top notch and able to pump out the high FPS and 4K, this will be a waste and you'll probably be more prone to notice any ghosting, especially if you take a hit in the FPS department. For slower paced games, this is especially great to play on with a 4K resolution, smoothing out the image on screen. This is built-in anti-aliasing essentially, and it's the big thing you'll notice switching from 1440p to 4K. Now this doesn't feel like the big jump from 1080p to 1440p, but it's still quite noticeable. The crispness of the image makes the playing experience feel more immersive, and I've been infatuated with Assassin's Creed Valhalla as the game already looks amazing in 1440p, but in 4K it becomes photorealistic. Next, the colors here are great with the IPS panel showing its benefit over a VA panel, so if you play vibrant games, this will be a great monitor for you. The physical panel adjustments are great also, and I always prefer a monitor that can do height, tilt, and swivel adjustments. The pivot here is a nice bonus also, and this means you won't need to mount this on a monitor arm unless you want to. Next, the speakers were a surprise here and are quite good. I mentioned in the panel settings section that the volume is set to 50% by default, but I actually forgot to check this even though I have to adjust this with every monitor I've used that has speakers, and thought the speakers weren't that great initially and even knocked them in my gray area section of this review, but after realizing that, I did turn it all the way up to 100% and they actually get quite loud, which is great. They're not going to blow your socks off, but for panel speakers, they get quite loud, and I think for most people, they can even forego getting external speakers if they do need something to be loud if they're playing in their room or anything like that. This won't be an issue. Last, because this has HDMI 2.1, it can display native 4K resolution for next-gen console gamers, so no upscaling, and it also means it can do HDR at 120 Hz. I only have the Xbox Series X, but it plays great at 4K and looks much better than my 4K TCL TV. The pixel density here made everything look smooth, and it didn't have any issues when playing games in terms of screen tearing or lag. Now that I've covered the good, let's get into the bad here, which are mostly minor complaints. The panel itself seems to run a little red in terms of its color, and you can of course adjust this in the panel settings, but I've noticed it's harder to nail down than other panels I've used. IPS panels also suffer from lower contrast ratios when compared to VA panels, and that was quite noticeable in certain games like Destiny 2 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This was actually one of my complaints with another IPS panel, the Samsung G50A, so it's not strictly an issue with this panel, it's something that most current IPS panels will have an issue with. With that being said, you can adjust most game settings to mostly eliminate the washed out look that it can create. I'll have video playing right now showcasing what it looks like in Assassin's Creed if the brightness and contrast ratios aren't where they need to be. Now this is something that could also happen on a VA panel, but the range of adjustments would be greater due to the larger contrast ratio, where here it seems like you're locked into a pretty narrow range of adjustments. I'm assuming this will improve over time though, like the response time has with IPS panels. If you play darker games though, like Dark Souls or Resident Evil, this may present some issues, or it may not look as good because of the contrast ratio. Next, the monitor has an issue with the sleep function where it doesn't always come back on when I hit the mouse or keyboard. Instead, it just sits there until I turn the monitor off and on again. There isn't anything in the panel settings that adjusts this, so it's something I'm stuck with, although it might just be my monitor and not happen with the one you buy. I'm actually beginning to wonder if I got sent an open box item instead of a new item after this sleep function issue, and I actually noticed that when I was unboxing this, the package that the power cable comes in was all marked up, and my power cable seemed to be pulled out and not rolled up like the normal way you get it when it's actually brand new. Moving on, this is going to be the gray area, which are things that may or may not matter to everyone, starting with the mold aesthetics, which I don't personally like much, but ASUS has their set look for their gaming lineup. The cable management holder at the bottom of the stand isn't a style I like either. I've used other monitors with this clip-on style, but I personally just prefer a hole to run the cables through. A hole would allow for cable movement when pivoting the monitor also. Next is something I would personally consider a positive and almost put it in the good section, and that's the extra USB ports. This is a personal preference thing though, as I don't think everyone will need or use these, but I need all the extra USB ports I can get, so I like when a monitor has them. Last, the peak brightness at 450 nits is good, but for as much as this costs, I do wish it was 600 or 1000 nits for HDR. This also doesn't have any local dimming zones from what I've been able to find online. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know in the comment section. Now, regardless of those two things, HDR does look good, and I'll have Doom Eternal in HDR at 4K playing right now, but at this price point, the lower nits, lack of local dimming, and no noticeable difference in the 3 HDR modes make this feel like it's just something that could have been so much more. At this price point of $800 too, I just feel like this is a weird zone where you are getting all this upside with the 4K resolution, the 144 Hertz, but including the HDR, it's a nice thing. It just feels tacked on versus like an actual good feature that would be something that somebody would buy this for. I personally don't use HDR a lot in games, but for those who do, just know what you're getting into with this monitor. Also, outside of games is where I've noticed the monitor runs a little more dim even with the brightness turned up. I try not to max out the brightness at 100% with the panel settings, and I usually peak at 90% with most panels, but even at 100% with this monitor, it's still on the dim side unless I adjust the NVIDIA control panel settings, which then requires more tweaks to gamma and contrast to nail the look down so it doesn't look washed out. I'm not sure most people will notice this, but having played on 3 panels in the last couple months that have 600 to 1000 nits, I can notice a difference when the brightness isn't as good. The higher typical and peak nits will be the brightness range adjustments it can provide you, just like I talked about earlier with the contrast ratio. So in conclusion, I think this is a solid choice for anyone looking to get a 4K 144Hz monitor. The refresh rate with a fast response time and vibrant colors make this a great choice. The monitor has plenty of in-panel setting options for those looking to tailor this to their playing preference also, which is great for console players. Well, hopefully this video helps you with your purchasing decision. I'll have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up. If you have any questions about this monitor that I didn't cover in this video, let me know in the comment section. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.